And
Hello, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
thank you, Pamela. So, sure, my name's Pam Davidson, and I am a retired educator, but I was an educator for 37 years. Started my career as a high school English teacher and leadership advisor. And that's important because that was the common thread through my entire 37-year career. And subsequent to being a high school English teacher, I became an administrator, high school assistant principal, and then a middle school principal, high school principal, director, and superintendent at the very end of my career. But in those different roles, the common thread, as I mentioned, was that understanding of and support for student leadership and student development, of which mentoring, which is our real focus for today, was an informal and sometimes formal part of my journey. But I've worked mainly in Southern Alberta in that role, and it has been a lively and very rewarding. It was a very rewarding career, I have to say.
Great, I love hearing that journey. Can you tell me about a mentoring program that you were a part of?
Great, great opportunity. Thank you. I might not stop talking. Um, with mentoring, I saw it in a couple of different ways because through student leadership, we had a lot of informal mentoring. And I ran some of those programs. When I became a principal of a middle school, it was my first principalship, is where I saw mentoring from the littles side. It was the young kids who were being mentored, and I saw some tremendous benefits there. Later in my career, I was a high school principal, and interestingly, I was dealing with the programming and the students who were the mentors of those littles previously mentioned. And that was really remarkable work that was being done in both of those schools. Both the kids who were being mentored, the young kids, had a teacher champion and a non-certificated educator champion. And then in the high school mentoring program, they had an instructor. And those little guys really loved the opportunity to interact with those big kids. And the big kids liked coming down, but what I saw as the person who was overseeing the school is that, oh, our little program here could benefit from a little bit of structure and organization and, putting some expectations and parameters in place so that the littles could benefit from it as much as possible, as well as putting those older kids in a circumstance and situation where they could clearly understand sort of their purpose because I think they would be more fulfilled when they recognize that, but also helping organize so that they could get some skill development and be better able to serve the littles with whom they were partnering. And so a little bit further down the road, when I ended up as the principal of the high school with the mentors, um, in the intervening years, the program had evolved, and with a good teacher champion, those high school students they had gained some training through Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So they were actually getting some great training, some great personal development themselves, and then their mentoring skills became much more robust. And I would say that their mentoring with those littles was being far more effective. So that was terrific. And in that same school, we had a lot of good work happening with leadership and with these older students looking after some of the younger ones. And we compressed that a little bit. So it wasn't just the high school students mentoring middle school. We created a program in our school that was called the LINC crew. And what it was an orientation and induction program for those grade 8 students coming into grade 9, because our high school was a grade 9 to 12 school. And so we had students who were in the upper grades nominated by teachers to become part of the LINC crew, as we called it. And then they were responsible for some welcoming, orienting, mentoring of some of these new incoming students to the school. And that was a tremendous, it's still going on at the school, as I understand, and that is 13 years later. So it's had some tremendous benefit in that transitional time and what can be a very anxious, trying time for those grade 8s coming into grade 9. we forget sometimes it can be a little bit of an intimidating transition. And so that program was deliberately implemented to try and reduce some of that anxiety, intimidation, and help those kids arrive in a better frame of mind, feel welcomed, warm in that school, making it feel like it was their own, that they belonged. And again, it was the work of those older students with some champion teachers to help that come along.
Can you tell me a bit more about the LINC program? Um, did they meet in the spring and then the fall?
Great questions. So we had orientation sessions in the spring. So those were brief little sessions where our LINC crew, they were the ones who would do sort of the hosting, organizing with these incoming kids. And then in the fall was the big immersive event. It was done off school, so before the formal school year commenced. And so it was only those new students coming in with the LINC crew. So a real commitment on the part of those kids to say, we are committed to this. We're coming in early. And the kids came in early because they felt, well, we want to be oriented. We want to feel we know what we're doing. We don't want to get lost in this big school on our first day. And so it was a combination of both, again, a little light touch in the spring and then a much more in-depth connection being forged in the fall when they came in. And that took buy-in from the entire staff because the staff was involved in multiple ways. When you've got all of these newbies in getting their bearings, the staff was supportive of the new kids, but also of the LINC crew, very capable, competent students. But you still want to make sure that the safety net was there. And we had our school council also sponsoring that sort of first big day, but then having some ongoing activities as the year went on to keep connected with those grade nines. And you know what? Sometimes those kids get too cool for school in a hurry, but we just wanted to make sure we had enough in place that those kids felt less intimidated, more confident as they entered the school so that we could reduce some of the anxiety that often accompanies any transition into a new setting.
You gave some great examples of the benefits for the new grade nines. Can you share some benefits to the older students that you saw?
Absolutely. I'll tell you. Uh, there are some of the kids who were nominated to be LINC crew members who didn't necessarily see in themselves their value, their strength, their their real ability to be contributors to the community. And so the teachers nominated students for the LINC crew, and when they were selected for the LINC crew, it was an invitation. And they gained a little confidence in many cases. Some of those kids were pretty confident already, so they maybe didn't, that wasn't such a big deal. But what I found was really special was how some of those perhaps less confident kids who didn't see the leadership potential they had that others saw were able to take advantage of the opportunity, step up to it, and then participate in this big school community event where they were looked up to as these leaders of these younger kids. And so some of the training that they received to be the LINC crew, that was growing their leadership abilities, their communication, their confidence, their organizational skill. Those were all their teamwork skill. All of those things had to come together. And you could see them developing it in themselves, witnessing it in others, sort of absorbing, taking on some of the things that they were learning, having to be flexible themselves when they're dealing with other kids. Their interpersonal skills were being honed, which is a really important skill to be developing in this day and age. So those older kids, competence, confidence, lots of skill building, and that notion, especially for some who were nominated, recognizing in themselves that they too could be leaders, in addition to all those kids who are just always ready to jump and help out and make the school a better place. Yeah.
If a school or teacher were thinking about running a mentoring program, what advice would you give them?
You know what? That really important here because having a champion Having a champion is so important. Even the best ideas will not fly unless you've got the right people supporting them and at the helm. So I would say we want to help students. First of all, if you can identify some of the things that they need and provide those opportunities for growth for the kids, that would be great. So getting a teacher who's willing to do that, have that flexibility, have the ability to develop relationships with kids, garner their trust and provide trust, it has a true trust in kids to step up and do those things, that would be great. I also think the notion of knowing that those, ensuring that the kids know that the teacher has their back. You don't want them to fail publicly. And this was something that was really key to all of our leadership and mentoring programs. You know, sometimes things might not be exactly as they needed to be, but you want to do a little private, let's do our fix, if you will. But publicly, you want to make sure they're doing well, because for kids to be vulnerable or to trust you, they need to know that you do have their back. So champion teachers who've really got good relational skills with kids, and then making sure that there's always a safety net there, that you are setting them up for setting the kids, both mentor, leader, students, and those younger students up for success. So that's going to be a positive experience, however and whoever is organizing it.
Um, just for your final wrap up here, why do you think mentoring is important?
Oh, wow. Well, it is so important, Pam. A great question. It is so important. Research is now bearing out that there's a lot of mental health benefits for people who are involved in in mentoring relationships. So I think in the era that we live, that's really important, helping with that thing that just. I also think, providing students with growth opportunities that they may or may not even be aware of is really important. Let's give them the opportunity, set them up, provide them so that they can grow and become those adults and those leaders that we hope that they can be. And I think when we look at leadership, we need to think about succession and sustainability. We know kids come through school and they do their thing, and one of the lessons I did always also want the kids to understand, and this was back to one of my very first leadership programs, was you need to be, you have a little bit of a responsibility in your own personal legacy to be a mentor to those kids who are younger than you, so that when you're gone onto your next adventure, hopefully taking all the lessons you've learned, you've been providing them with some lessons that they can then employ and make their school a better place, and consequently then their growth opportunity when they move beyond the school can also be enhanced. So growth opportunities for the kids, sustainability in any of the programs that are being created, success for those students, and succession for programs. um, I think all of those things come together and are offered in mentoring programs. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Pam, for your time and for sharing about your mentoring journey throughout your career. Um,
Thank you for the opportunity, Pamela. Again, kids are our future. And we talked about this in the world. You may be but one person, but to one person, you may be the world. And you just never know for whom you might make a difference. So mentoring provides so much that you may never know, but it's a noble, noble effort if people put it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.